is Terry Bradshaw, quarterback. Pittsburgh Steelers.
It's 7:15. There's a new home run champion of all time, and it's Henry Aaron.
This is baseball, Major League Baseball. And this is
ABC's Monday Night Baseball, live from Fenway Park in Boston, Massachusetts.
Looking. He's under the gun. He's tied. He throws. It is.
It's time for the January 20th, 2025 episode of the Past Our Prime podcast, which means we are talking about the January 20th, 1975 issue of Sports Illustrated. And when I say we, I mean, of course, Bill Mahoney and Mark Hoffman joining me as usual. How goes things, guys?
I'm doing great.
Yeah.
I'm doing complaints. I don't know about Mark.
Fine, all considered.
Yeah. We should probably tell everyone that Mark, if you listen to the show, you know that Mark, first of all, we record the show in Pasadena, and they were hit, as everyone knows, by these horrible wildfires. But our good friend and pal, Mark, let's get the good news is that he, his wife, and Caitlin are all fine, but Mark lives in Pacific Palisades. And Mark, what happened?
Well, our house is gone with so many others. It was a surreal, situation. I'd actually just been hiking up in the Highlands that morning. And so I was probably where the fire started, maybe an hour and a half before it started. And and I got down and I actually left the house. And then all of a sudden when I left the house, then I started getting all these, notifications that I could see smoke in the air, and my daughter started calling me. So I tried to turn back and go down PCH, and then I couldn't get back to the house. I had it blocked off. So I was separated from them for about a day. And so we've been living in hotels. Some friends have been really nice, and relatives that have let us stay at their places too. But, we're fortunate we found a house to lease, and we just moved in. So at least we have a little bit of normalcy right now.
A little bit, because listen to this, people. Mark and his wife and daughter, they're evacuated. The fires are just beyond anyone's comprehension. And they go and stay at a friend's house in Hollywood Hills. And what happens there, Mark?
Oh, then we get notifications of evacuations there. So then we headed back to my sister and brother-in-law's place in Century City. So yeah, we're nomads.
And then now you're back, and now your new place is back in a canyon.
Yes,
it is.
Right. And wasn't that somewhat like in danger for a little bit the other day?
I guess, but you know what? You can never predict where a fire's going to hit or an earthquake's going to hit or whatever. Just got to do it, one day at a time. It's really weird. I sweat the small stuff. I sweat how my fantasy team is doing. The big stuff doesn't make me as nervous, which is weird and something, that doesn't make any sense. But like I said, we're resilient and we're trying to get through. But like I say, I mentally and physically, I really feel drained right now. I am like,
you should.
I'd say I'm like 30% what I normally am.
That's really strange that you sweat your fantasy league, because you only win every freaking year. So I could see
why that cause you
that cause you consternation.
That's right. Because like I say, it's the little things, or let's find that parking spot so I can save $5,
Yes. Yes.
It's the little things in life, but it's the big picture. And sometimes I think you have to be calm for those people when the big things hit.
Absolutely. Especially you got a 20-year-old daughter that, I can't imagine.
That was the only house she ever knew.
Yes. Well, we lived there 26
only
years.
house she's ever known. So yeah, for her, it's emotional.
26 years there, and she was born there, raised there. And, it's, and our neighbors were great. We have so many friends in that area that, it's not just
that now no one really knows what it's going to do.
It's a community that burned down. That's just what's so striking. Businesses are gone. Some are still standing, but a lot are gone. But it's the community feel that's gone. And I don't know how long it's going to take to rebuild that.
And Mark, as of now, is that the plan? You'll rebuild?
That's our plan. We would like to, rebuild, and eventually one day, I don't know how many years it'll take, get back there,
Yeah.
That was sort of our dream house, and we wanted to retire and eventually give it to Caitlin.
Yeah.
You'll make it happen.
I look forward to that day.
Well, we'll make this episode happen too. So.
Yep. Terry
segue.
Bradshaw on the cover of the issue after the Steelers beat the Vikings in Super Bowl IX, 16-6, the final. Not the most exciting of games, but the third of 4 Super Bowl losses for Minnesota and the first of the Steelers' 6 Super Bowl wins. So before we get to the rest of this issue, Mark, you gotta raise some money. This isn't a GoFundMe, but this is an ad where Mark's gonna bring in the big bucks. Go, Mark.
Well, my only issue is, does the cigarette company even exist anymore? Because I've never heard of it. It's called Old Gold Filters in a crush-proof box, new crush-proof box. And what makes it interesting, what caught my eye, was that it's a cigarette and it's being held by someone who appears to look like a Napoleon Bonaparte. He's dressed in that, outfit with the hat, on sideways and stuff. But it's actor Oliver Reed wearing the hat.
Oh.
So it's like, I just got struck that Oliver Reed is playing Bonaparte in the cigarette ad.
What are the name of the cigarettes again?
Old Gold Filters.
Old Gold.
I'm pretty sure the fire was started by an Old Gold cigarette.
Probably.
Yes.
And Oliver Reed was this great, actor who lived a really hard life in the sense that he drank a lot and he womanized, and he got slapped on the air. I want to say, was it Chili Winter slapped him on the air in a talk show? But he was filming the original movie Gladiator with Russell Crowe when he died during production, and then they had to fill out his role by CGI and
is that right?
And they used behind the shoulder shots with like some other actor. But yeah, so that's his final film, is the Gladiator.
Well, Mark, if you want one of those Old Gold cigarette tins, you can get them on eBay. They are.
Can I?
Yes,
Well, me, I smoke like a chimney, so
I know you do.
Yep.
I know you do, but whenever it's to you, there's always some, a Tarrington in your hand.
I think,
Old
Mark, this is a time for you to reinvent yourself.
Thank you.
And I would go with alcohol and cigarettes.
And womanizing.
Well, I
that he's already done.
About a week.
We know that. He's already naked half the time, so.
That's what they said. Now that I live up around like Laurel Canyon area where hippies used to live, I'll just be running naked all the time. You told me that, Bill. Yeah, I'll be running naked. I'll be
You've already been doing that.
That's what everyone does.
Into your lifestyle.
Wonderful. Good. Hey, let's talk a little scorecard, shall we? Bill, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, just going to talk about a linesman of the NHL. This is what happened in a 2-week span. He broke his nose, suffered a 16-stitch cut in his right hand, and then broke a bone in his right leg. But the NHL took care of him. They gave him 10 days off.
That should do it.
How you get over a broken bone in your right leg in 10 days, but damn.
Yeah, get on the ice.
Yes. Are you coming in tomorrow? Well, I pretty much lost my face and my leg. No excuses.
Yes.
Get out there.
Mark, you got one?
I actually have 2, but I think I'm going to go with the ABA one, which is the ABA was thinking of implementing something I call the right of first refusal, which is something in common practice sometimes in sports where you're like quite a restricted free agent now in sports, and another team can make you an offer, but that other team has a chance to match that offer. Well, this is what the ABA was kind of proposing way back 50 years ago. And it was a solution, they thought, to the reserve clause, that bind a player to one team,
Right.
Until, I like the way they phrase it here, until he's traded or sold. So, that doesn't sound like slavery. I don't know what is. But so there's right of first refusal, at least allow that player to make more money, and then the team wants to keep him, great. But if they don't want to pay that money, he can go to a team that'll pay him more.
How about this one? East Chicago, Indiana have 3 basketball players who graduated from Washington High School in 1971. Pete Turgovich, Junior Bridgman, and Tim Stoddard start for UCLA, Louisville, and North Carolina State, which were ranked 2nd, 3rd, and 4th nationally last week. So not a bad high school team to have 3 guys that are now starting for 3 top programs in college basketball.
Did you find out how good the high school team was?
I don't have it in front of me, but
Okay.
they were state champions, I believe.
Oh, okay. That's exactly. So yeah, they pretty good.
They had a fourth guy named Darnell Adel, who ended up at Murray State. So 4 players played
Yeah.
major college hoops. Not bad.
Dang.
Speaking of major college hoops, in They Said It, Eddie Sutton, Arkansas basketball coach, commenting on the decision of the Southwest Conference to use lie detector tests during investigations of recruiting violations, says, quote, if you strapped a couple of coaches I know into a polygraph chair, they'd be electrocuted.
Same with nowadays.
Yeah, that has not changed.
That's not changed.
No. All right, let's get to our cover story. And it's the Steelers and the beginning of one of the greatest dynasties in NFL history. The Steelers win their first Super Bowl. Pittsburgh punches it out. Steelers and Vikings in the 9th Super Bowl. Minnesota playing in their 3rd. They lost to the Chiefs in 1970, the Dolphins in 74, the Steelers in 75, the Raiders in 77. The head coaches of those teams, Hank Stram, Don Shula, Chuck Noll, John Madden.
Dang. Dang.
Not
Who's
bad. We've talked about this game a little bit in the past, and that it was 16-6 the final, 2-0 at the half. If it sounds like a defensive struggle, that's an understatement, isn't it, guys?
Yeah, I had my joke before. It was a Willie Stargell 2-run homer that put Pittsburgh up 2-0 at the half.
Well, did you guys? I went back and replayed that Tarkington tackled in the end zone for a safety. Did you guys replay any of that?
No.
I went slow on that. I think nowadays he would have been down at the 1 on replay.
Oh, is that right?
His leg is down. His leg hits before the line with a ball in his hand. I think he would have been down at the 1 or the 6-inch line.
Interesting.
Just
And then they would have had the safety maybe on the punt. Who knows?
That's but I thought, man, it's then I just thought how boring of a game that was, and
Yeah.
Well,
and how bad the quarterback. I'm gonna say bad. They just didn't seem to have the greatest games because the defenses were just too good.
The quarterbacks.
Yeah, the quarterbacks, that is, yes.
Yeah.
the thing that stuck to me about this article in Sports Illustrated is we're talking about a Super Bowl now, right? The brevity of it. 6 pages, that's it, dedicated to the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
Right.
That's it. Could you imagine today covering a Super Bowl and only dedicating 6 pages to it?
Now it'd be there'd be a whole magazine on it.
Oh my God, would
It'd be
there
everything.
But I was young enough to remember those early Super Bowls, and they didn't have, the fanfare that, they have today. I mean, a lot of times the halftime show was a college band. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I remember the marching bands. Yeah.
Steelers defense held Minnesota to 17 yards rushing, so Tarkington abandoned that and went to the air. And as Bill said, not a great day for the passers. 11 of 27 throwing for 102 yards and 3 interceptions. Yikes. Up 9-0 in the 4th. Minnesota has the ball on the Steelers' 5. Chuck Foreman gets drilled by Mean Joe Green. He fumbles. Mean Joe recovers. Steelers win 16-6. So that was it. That was the beginning of the Steelers and the Vikings. Man, great teams, but they just couldn't win the big one.
And they
4
won't be
Super Bowl appearances in the 70s for the Vikings, man. That's impressive.
Franco Harris, 158 yards rushing on 34 carries. He breaks Larry Zonka's record that was set the year prior when he was the game's MVP. So good grief, he's at it again. We'll have more on that Super Bowl, by the way, coming up in a little bit. But let's move on to Johnny Miller, the player of the year in 1974. And he's picked up where he left off, winning the Phoenix Open by 14 strokes thanks to 4 rounds under 70, including a second-round score of 10 under par 61. A lot of people on hand for this tournament, including Bill, one of your favorites.
Oh boy, Mr. Evil Knievel. And Evil Knievel, I think, sort of misspoke. He thought his golf game was better than it was. He had once boasted he would play any pros golf for $10,000 a hole. Yeah. It turned out that Tom Weiskopf, who he played with in a pro-am, had said, Come on, this guy, Evil, is a phony. He said he's got a 12 handicap, but he's really a 16. He wants people to believe he's better than he is. But Weisskopf loosened up a little bit. At the end of the pro-am, he changed his mind. He said, Evil's all right. He's just another 15 handicapper with a slice. But Evil, I mean, to jump over cars and buses, you got to be confident in everything you do.
Right. I think it would have been challenging if they played the golf tournament with Evil, like, jumping over the course, as they're golfing and stuff like that,
Well, Mark, on that note, after that pro-am, only 4 months later, Evil jumped and crashed over it when he was jumping 13 buses at Wembley Stadium, and he broke his pelvis. So he was preparing for that as well.
Oh my God. One quick thing on Johnny Miller, though.
Yeah.
That, he had that unbelievable 74 year where, he was leading money winner. He had 8 wins and stuff. I think he won 353,000 that year, which at that time was the leading winner. And in 75, I think he had 3 wins by early February. But then, so this article is talking about how hot he is. But then after those 3 wins, I don't think he won again in 75.
I think you're right, Mark. I think
it's the Sports Illustrated jinx coming in again.
Let's head to Kentucky for Rupp's old fief is far from barren. Joe B. Hall is now coaching Kentucky, trying to get out of from the ghost of legendary coach Adolph Rupp. Was forced into retirement 2 years ago because of his age. At the time, 70 was a mandatory age for University of Kentucky employees to retire. Rupp is still in the building. In fact, he has an office right down the hall from where Joe B sets up. That is not a good place to be. Joe B, no matter what he does, cannot escape Adolph Rupp.
He was in the stands at the games as well. And he also had a post-game show where he wasn't easy on Joe B. Hall. No matter what he did, even though Joe B. Hall won a title in 77, 78, he never lived up to what Adolph Rupp thought he should.
But the one difference is, like, for instance, when John Wooden retired, there was a series of coaches at UCLA, and they all would last 2 years. Like, it was Gene Bartow for 2 years, then Gary Cunningham for 2 years, then Larry Brown for 2 years. Nobody lasted very long. Hall, despite being in the shadow of Rupp, still coached the team for, I think, 13 seasons. I think he was a coach from 72 to 85. So, but what's even more amazing is between Rupp and Hall, those were the only 2 coaches for Kentucky basketball over 55 years.
Wow.
That's
right. That's right up there with the Steelers have had like 3 coaches in the last 55 years or something like that.
Wasn't it from the Cowboys? The Cowboys just had Tom Landry, and then they had
he was the only coach.
Yeah.
So Jerry got there.
Exactly. Jimmy Johnson and Tom Landry.
But this Kentucky team got all the way to the finals where they lost to UCLA. So
that's right. That's right.
It was a good season for Joe B. Hall.
Yeah. Rupp is supposedly still upset that he was forced out and is rumored to be helping other schools by talking to recruits against Kentucky. Now, he said that was not true, but that's some serious bad blood. It wasn't Joe B. Hall's fault that he was forced into retiring. And here's this old codger who's telling people, don't go there.
Well, nowadays, if that came up, they'd find a way around that law.
Oh, yeah.
If that was still somewhere, and all of a sudden, whatever one coach was forced to retire, they'd find a way around that.
Yeah.
Back in those days, they just said, that's the law, you lose.
Part 2 of the article, or the articles on Bill Tilden, a tennis great from back in the day, hero with a flaw. It's from a book by Frank DeFord. On the tennis court, Big Bill Tilden was a winner, the best player of his time, perhaps of all time. But in the end, he was in disgrace, a lonely loser. He a 7-time U.S. Open winner, but had a thing for teenage boys, often under the age of 18. Had a rough life, had 3 siblings all die before he was even born. Who knows what kind of effect that had. I don't like when people kind of make these excuses. The bottom line is this guy had 2 lives. He was a great, great tennis player, and he was a pedophile.
Right.
There's just no 2 ways around it. He was jailed twice for having underage boys, and from what it sounds like, was literally caught in the act. With at least one of them, if not
in a car.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of this happened in Beverly Hills and Hollywood, Sunset Boulevard. You got flagged down. I think it was Rexford and Sunset, right in Beverly Hills, because he had a 14-year-old boy got out of the driver's seat. It's just like very disturbing.
Quite. Yeah. And, 14-year-olds shouldn't be driving.
Um,
But Bill, tell the story about, he
was in jail. Yeah, when he
Right.
was in jail in 1949, when he was named the greatest athlete in his sport by a larger margin than any athlete in any other sports. That's what the jailer said. Jailer said, well, here comes Big Bill Tilden again. Tilden was being released from jail. How crazy is that, man?
So
that
he
would
was-
never happen today. Never.
he was voted as a better tennis player in his
Yep.
sport than like Babe Ruth was a baseball player in his sport. That's how dominant he was
Yep.
in the first half of the 20th century. And he gets that news while behind bars. Let's move on. Let's get back to some football here. It's hard to believe, but this article is called Bowling Over Its Rivals. And basically, it's about the TV ratings for football back 50 years ago. And they were not that good. They had kind of peaked, they thought, certainly for ABC and CBS, not on NBC. The Peacock Network was killing it, thanks to a guy by the name of Carl Lindemann Jr., who was credited largely for helping merger the NFL and AFL. That's because he and the president of NBC Sports gave the AFL a 5-year, $42 million deal in '64. Because of that influx of money, the league was doing really well. But it's hard to believe that they thought that football wasn't doing well because of overexposure. There was too much of it on TV.
Oh, yeah.
What
Yeah,
a
that's the
difference 50
problem.
years make, man.
They actually play football 2 days a week, the NFL. Oh, my God.
Yeah, right?
That's right. That's
I mean,
right.
now you got the NFL network, you got ESPN, you got the SEC network, you got the Big Ten network,
You got all networks. Yeah.
Right.
But you know what's interesting when you think of TV today, or at least pay TV, not pay TV, but free TV, the major networks. NBC is known as the Olympics channel. Outside the
Yes.
Olympics, they're really not thin out of do any sports. You would think of Fox or CBS or even ABC/ESPN before you would think of NBC.
Yeah.
But at this period in the 70s, NBC was on a roll. I think they just picked up the NBA package. I think they had the baseball package still, which is what I grew up on. They had the college NCAA tournament, the AFC package. So,
Yeah.
I mean, they were rolling. They were doing really well. And it's hard to believe that the AFC package was had better ratings than the NFC package.
Yeah.
Everyone stole that. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the AFC at that time, the Steelers, Dolphins, Raiders, and O.J. Simpson and the Bills. So they were, dominating the dominant conference for much of the 70s. And that had to play a part in that. It could also be because the lead announcer for NBC was one of the all-time greats, Curt Gowdy. As a kid, when you heard that voice, you knew it was a big game. And in fact, he was the lead announcer on the Steelers Super Bowl win over the Vikings that we just spoke of, one of 9 Super Bowls for Gowdy. In 1963, Gowdy purchased radio stations WCCM and WCCM-FM in Lawrence, Massachusetts, later changing the FM station's call letters to WCGY to somewhat match his name. In 1984, a young man by the name of Dan Roche took his first job at that WCGY station in Lawrence. Rochie grew up listening to Gowdy do Red Sox games, and the WBZ-TV sports anchor and reporter and good friend of mine from Boston joins us now to talk a bit about his first job working for the legendary broadcaster. Hey, Danny, how's New England doing tonight?
Scotty, everything's good here. Mark, Bill, nice to join you guys. Well, things are in a panic because the Celtics are in a bit of a funk. There hasn't been a title here in Titletown since June. So everybody's a little bit upset about that. Mike Vrabel's now the new head coach, so there's lots of good things there. So everything's just fine up here in New England. But, there's a lot of whining going on because everybody is so spoiled from title after title in the last 25 years.
Yeah, up until the Pats' first Super Bowl, they hadn't won a championship in Boston since the Celtics in the late 80s or something like that. Maybe the Bruins, I don't remember. But they've won 38 now in the last 17 years.
No. It's just 6 Super Bowls, 4 World Series, 2 NBA championships, and 1 Stanley Cup. Easy, okay? All right.
How are the
We'll have
Reds
more
doing?
Super Bowls.
Who?
The Reds.
Yes. As Taylor Twellman said, I spoke to him after they lost their 4th straight trip to the MLS Cup championship game in Washington, D.C. I said, tough 1A, and he's like, you might as well call us the Buffalo Bills of the MLS. So they're still trying to get right again. That's the one team that needs to get right.
Well, actually, the funny thing is that we're talking about the Minnesota Vikings in this issue because they lost 4 Super Bowls in the 70s, but we'll get to that in a bit. Danny, you've been around some of the all-time greats, Brady and Big Papi and Belichick and so many others, but as a younger guy, you're 20 years old, you walk into the station and you meet one of your first all-time greats, Curt Gowdy. What was that like?
Well, the whole process was interesting because I was just a kid born and raised here in the Boston area, about a small town about 30 miles north of Boston in North Andover. And I knew in 7th grade that I wanted to do 2 things. One, play college baseball, which I did at a small school in Maine. And then one was get into broadcasting or sports journalism. And I went to Syracuse for that. One of the first people I met at Syracuse was Sean McDonough, who said to me, he said, go home and try to get an internship or a part-time gig or just anything you can at one of the TV stations, radio stations, newspapers in your area. So me being the adventurous guy, I went to so many different places. Everybody said no except for Curt Gowdy's station, where the program director, who ended up being there for 50 years, said to me that I could come in and watch, that they didn't have anything for me at the time. So me saying, sure, I went in and started just getting coffee for everybody else. And then lo and behold, I was able to get a full-time job coming out of Syracuse. And it was overtime. Now, Curt Gowdy wasn't there a lot. You know, he was kind of retired at that point. He was everywhere, in all different places, but his family ran the place still. And it was actually a thrill for me. And one of the reasons why I started covering the Red Sox while I was in college in summers and things like that, it was because of the Gowdy name. I was able to get a press pass because it was Curt Gowdy broadcasting to go to Red Sox games. And that's how I kind of started covering the mid-80s teams in Fenway Park. And just using the name Curt Gowdy was pretty cool. Everywhere you went, you'd say, I'm with Curt Gowdy broadcasting. They're like, oh, that's awesome. I interviewed Yaz on the porch of the Otissaga Hotel, just near where the Hall of Famers stay in baseball. He did the Today Show, and he came over, sat in a rocking chair and talked to me because he knew I was working for Curt Gowdy, those kind of things. So everywhere you went, the name Curt Gowdy was awesome. And then to change the radio station to WCGY, have it be for Curt Gowdy was really, really cool. And over the course of time, I got to know the family real well and got to know Curt real well. So it was a very special place for me.
Danny, in the 70s, he was, for me, the kind of announcer that when you heard his voice, you knew it was a big game.
Well, and one of the gentlemen that I worked for in Lawrence, Massachusetts, we did a bunch of high school games. He was the local big shot, and he had the honor of having Curt Gowdy use his leave a voice message on his message machine. So you would call him and say, hey, this is Frankie Benjamin. Then you'd hear, hey, this is Frankie Benjamin's house. He can't come to the phone right now. And it was that cool, tones of Curt Gowdy. And you were like, oh, that's so awesome.
The original cameo, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right. So it was everything about him was because, growing up, you just heard him everywhere. Olympics, American Sportsman with Ted Williams. And, they were your idols. I used to have the Sears and Roebuck catalog where I'd look through for Ted Williams fishing gear. And, Gowdy was synonymous with that in Super Bowls and, NCAA championship games. So it was everything and more that you wanted in that voice. And I idolized him. So, yeah, to be able to work for that name and that family was really a highlight for me and a thrill for me. One of the thrills I've had in my broadcasting life, especially being from Boston, where he was the voice of the Red Sox for so long.
There was something about that voice. I don't know if it was a Wyoming twang or something, but there was something very calming. It wasn't a generic broadcaster voice. It was very distinctive.
Yeah, and it was the cowboy. He was from Wyoming, so he was considered. He wrote a book, and I specifically the title, it was Cowboy Voice or something along those lines. And yeah, he just had that very folksy, come on in, I'm watching the game type of voice, which you just appreciated. And what I love about this business is everybody's different, right? And he just had that distinct voice. His mom made him take elocution, exercises, what have you, when he was 10 years old. So he developed that kind voice that people loved. And You know, he told me the story that, again, one of the things he said to me was, you never know who's listening on any particular night or day. So always be at your best, because he said that one of the ways that he got hired into, doing, I think it was ABA basketball, was there was the owner of the team was just driving around at night in his, getting a ride in his limo, what have you, coming from dinner. And he said, put a game on. And he put the game on, and it was Curt Gowdy doing the game. And it was one of those classics. Find me the voice of that. Who was doing that? I like him. He's really good. And that was one of the things that got him started in his broadcasting career. So he had that folksy voice. And he said to me always, be yourself, but always be sharp and be ready to go whenever you're on, because you never know who's watching. You never know who's listening. And he was right.
I was going to follow that up, Dan, when you said about talking with him, that he gave you some advice. What else did you get to talk to him about? Because sometimes when you meet an idol, there's so many things you want to cover. What else do you guys talk about?
Well, let me tell you a funny story first. Is he was when I was working there, he was an older gentleman, and he was kind of, I don't want to say past his prime, but he had done a lot and done so much, and he was just more busy with family and fishing and everything else. And he got talked into doing the Patriots on AM radio here in the mid 80s for a year. And it was hard for him because he really wasn't up to date with the NFL and everything else. So I was a spotter for him for a couple of games, and it was a thrill for me, to just go in. But, normally you'd go in and say, okay, this is the quarterback, these are the two running backs, here's your wide receivers. And a broadcaster would get comfortable, but I had to point every single time, here's the two running backs, here's the two running backs, here's the quarterback, and then when we got done, and he couldn't have been any nicer to me than he was. He spoke to me for about 25 minutes about the business and what to watch for and what to look for. And when you're doing this, do that, like preparation and everything you could possibly imagine. For me, I drove home. I remember driving home like just on top of the world. I don't even think I needed a car, and I got home and that was the most awesome talk I've ever had for a guy like that. It was a Hall of Famer. It was a legend. It was really, really cool. And I went back to the office, and I think I saw him in the office on Wednesday, and he had a huge office with hunting things and fish and all that kind of stuff. And I popped my head around the corner to say hi. And I said, hey, Mr. Gowdy, how you doing? And he's like, hey, Fred, how's it going? I'm like, oh, he didn't remember my name, but he was the best. I liked him a lot.
So how much in your career now, do you take what Gowdy said? How much do you, on a daily basis, do you take from him?
Well, I take it from the people that worked there. I was there for 10 years, and I just learned so many things about life. And I remember his program director on the AM side telling me stories of him and the sales manager walking arm in arm, the three of them, down the streets of Lawrence. The station hadn't even been built yet. And he was telling them, we're going to go build a radio station and build it from the ground up. And you're the part of the foundation. So let's go do that. So the program director, his name was Bruce Arnold, had so many stories and just so many words of advice for myself. I met my wife there. And to this day, I'll always say, when I'm writing a letter or anything, like day and the date. Because he used to say that to me all the time. Whenever you make a letter out or anything like that, he used to always say, be yourself. And Gowdy was the same way too. Curt was always like, be yourself. That was such a big thing for him. He was just saying, don't try to be somebody else, just be yourself. And the cool thing was the program director at that station, he was a Hall of Famer in my mind too, because what he did over his 50-year career there is he found 13 couples, people who had never known each other before they worked at the radio station. He would come up to me and say, my wife, Pam, he goes, Pam's perfect for you. Pam's perfect for you.
Wow.
And we both were seeing different people at the same time when we got there. But he kept hammering it home. So we ended up going out on a date, and lo and behold, we ended up getting together. But we were the 11th of the 13 couples that he put together at that radio station. All 13 went on to get married. All 13 went on to have kids, and all 13 still married to this day. So he was like the matchmaker of everyone. So he was cool. Gowdy was cool. And like I said, the family was cool. The funniest part was Trevor, his son. He had Curt Gowdy Jr. and Trevor. Curt Gowdy Jr. worked in New York for ABC. He was doing things there, but Trevor ran the radio stations, and he was a piece of work. You'd see the parking lot in the back used to flood a lot. And sure enough, you'd say, oh, it's raining out or whatever. You'd see Trevor in his full waders, in his fly fishing, a kit, and he'd be fly fishing practicing, just casting just in the parking lot for hours as you'd watch him, and you'd be like, "That's a Gowdy, that's a Gowdy," you know what I mean? So it was pretty cool.
So obviously, Danny, the matchmaker really didn't like Pam.
Yeah. Well, have you been talking to Pam again? Come on. Yeah. So it was good. Very nice.
Do you have a favorite like call or just memory of a game that Curt called that stood with you?
There's a tie with that. Here's one of the coolest things that we did. So you guys know when you're starting out in this business, you'll do anything, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things that we were assigned to do was they asked me and another guy that the Gowdys would like to just kind of put everything in one storage space. They had a home in Florida in Palm Beach where he had radio stations. They had a home in Wyoming where he had radio stations. They had a home in Boston. And they said, hey, you just put stuff in boxes. So everybody remembers the famous call of the final at bat of Ted Williams, where he says, and that's the final at bat, when not many people knew going into that game that was going to be Ted's final game in a Red Sox uniform in his career. But we were cleaning out tapes, and the old reel-to-reel tapes, they had these tiny tapes, and we were just listening. Him and I were sitting in their studio listening to these reel-to-reel tapes and everything else. And wouldn't you know it, we came across whatever, I think that was 1960, whatever year it was for Ted Williams. We came across the dugout show that Curt used to do with a guest. And it was crystal clear on the play-by-play on the reel. And it was the interview that he did before the game with Ted Williams, where Ted said he was calling it quits. And we're looking at each other and saying, we could sell this for a lot of money if we conveniently just hit it. You know what I mean? But we put it in the box, but we just listened to the whole thing, and we both had chills as we were listening to it, saying, that's awesome. That's Curt Gowdy and Ted Williams. That's folklore, And I think I said to either Mrs. Gowdy or someone in the Gowdy family, said, listen, you got to get that to the Hall of Fame. You know what I mean? I don't know if they ever did, but it was just like, that's like a huge part of Red Sox history, baseball history, Curt Gowdy and Ted Williams. So that was one of the cool moments I had at that radio station too. So there were lots of, and I can also tell you that I got to know the family real well, and they became very, I don't want to say this in a bragging way, but they were very proud of the work that I was doing. And I worked for the Red Sox doing pre and post game shows and radio and everything else. And, Mr. Gowdy, and I think, he passed away in mid 2000s, and I was doing TV then and, covering Super Bowls and World Series and everything else myself. And he came to Fenway Park. He knew he was going to not make it. And it was going to be his last visit to Fenway Park. So his family was there, his wife, Jerry, his daughter, Cheryl, his son, Trevor, who I mentioned was the general manager, and his other son, Curt, and they all came and sat in a luxury suite. And they called me, and I was in the press box, and they said, hey, the Gowdys would like to see you. And I went in and I sat for like an inning with Curt, and it still gets me emotional. But he was like, Danny, just keep doing what you're doing. I'm so proud. And, he passed away right after that. But it was really, really cool to be like recognized by Curt Gowdy. He meant everything to me.
That's awesome. I'm getting chills.
Yeah. That's your boyhood hero, man.
Yeah, exactly.
Dang.
So, I didn't mean to get emotional. Scotty, I hate you.
It's like we're watching West Wing together, Danny.
Don't get me started.
We are talking with Dan Roche of WBZ-TV in Boston. Danny, the game in this issue that Gowdy did was the Steelers winning their first Super Bowl of that 70s dynasty, the first of 4. You know a thing or two about dynasties. Compare that Steelers team to the Patriots run of 9 Super Bowls, 6 of them wins from 2001 to 2018.
Well, and I think to me, it's interesting because every time I think of dynasty and hear that word dynasty now, I think of the one thing that we're seeing, and you can take it into today's NFL world, and people, it's like, I don't think it gets talked about enough, right? It's a coach quarterback league, and it'll always be a coach quarterback league. And when you think of dynasties, that's what you think of, right? You think of Chuck Noll and Terry Bradshaw. I mean, that's kind of what you think of when it comes to winning Super Bowls and being that way. And everyone wants to dissect around here and nationwide the whole Bill Belichick, Tom Brady thing, but it was the both of them, and it was the defense in the first 3 Super Bowls. And yes, Brady was great, and he took a chance on him, but Belichick was the guy in the first year that Brady was a rookie. people that I've worked with and said that, when he would come into the production meetings, they would say, talk about certain things. And he would light up and he would say, Brady, 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 Brady. So Bill recognized something in Tom Brady early on. And then they got married together basically in football life. And they got 3, and then they got another 3. And yeah, it didn't end well, what have you. But I always say to people, if you want to argue what the dynasty looks like in New England, go back and, look back on the Tampa Bay season when he left New England, where Bruce Arians basically said to him, you take the offense, I'll take the defense, and we'll go together hand in hand here. And they won the Super Bowl. And you watch Brady in that postseason run, in that Super Bowl especially, he was an extension of Bill Belichick. He wasn't Bruce Arians. He was calling timeouts. He was, the situation, the yardage, what have you. Everything was Belichick. So to me, he learned everything from Bill and just extended it. He became like a Bill Russell, a coach player in that Super Bowl win. So that cemented that. So that's what I think of when I think of the Steelers. I think of Terry Bradshaw, Chuck Noll, and they had that steel curtain defense like the Patriots, 01, 03, 04, had that tremendous defense with what arguably should be Hall of Famer after Hall of Famer. It hasn't been yet. And then Tom Brady became Tom Brady when Randy Moss came to town and he threw, the 50 touchdown passes and what have you, and then went on to win the 3 more Super Bowls. But that's what I think of, coach quarterback league. And even nowadays, Mahomes and Andy Reid, and, the Patriots are trying to get back there now, you hope, with Vrabel and Drake May. It's just, I don't think it gets hammered home enough when you talk dynasties, when you talk Steelers, when you talk Patriots, when you talk Cowboys, and you talk 49ers. It's a coach quarterback league. And don't ever forget that. And you have to have both. You have to have really above average superstars at both positions in order to win Super Bowl after Super Bowl after Super Bowl.
So like LA is known as a Lakers and Dodgers town. Is Boston, is it more divided between the 4 teams, or is there a clear hierarchy?
It's been interesting to watch over my career. Growing up, the Red Sox were everything, right? And, the Celtics were always the Celtics, the Bruins and the Red Sox. So we've had like different runs of different teams. The Celtics had the 60s where they just kept winning championship after championship. But not a lot of people saw that because they weren't on TV as much and things like that. And then, the big bad Bruins were everything to me as a kid, with Bobby Orr and Phil Esposito. And then when they won 2 Stanley Cups, that's what the team everybody fell in love with. And then it became, the Red Sox and the 86 years, we all know about that. And then once Belichick and Brady came, a lot of games were blacked out. When I was growing up as a kid, you couldn't watch them on TV. Watch Giants. That's why there's a lot of Giants fans, still transplants here in New England, because you couldn't see the games. You'd listen to them. And, you had your players and, Minnie Mac Heron and Plunkett for a year, or what have you, in a couple of years, and those kind of players, but nobody until Belichick and Brady came. So in 04, it was always about the Red Sox. It was we're doomed and the curse. But once the Red Sox won, it changed everything a little bit. And then they won again in 07. And then it really became a Patriot town because people realized just how special it was with Belichick and Brady. So now it's been Patriots pretty much for, since the Sox won a couple of World Series. So it shifted in all different shifts. And right now it's still a football town. And the Red Sox are battling to try to get back. The fans have lost kind of faith and ownership the last 5 years, ever since Mookie Betts was shipped out of town, in 2020 or what have you. There's been anger from the fans in that sense. The Celtics have been great, and they've been consistent, winning another one in June, which was really, really cool. And then the Bruins have been the Bruins. They won 1 in 11, but they're still trying to get back to that too. They made it in 19 and just didn't win it and lost in Game 7, which was heartbreaking. So it's been a shift of everybody. So for me, it's been really cool. It's been fun to watch them all evolve and go over time. And I've been right there. As Scotty knows, with the Red Sox, we were doing, and I was the guy in the stands and pre and post game shows, 03, 04, 05. And those were the greatest years you could ever want to be, because it was the heartbreak of 03 and Tim Wakefield and Aaron Boone. And then getting back there in 04 and winning at Yankee Stadium. And we were with them every step of the way from start to finish. It was so much fun. I snuck on a duck boat with a camera and in 04, and I was on with Gabe Kapler, Doug Mirabelli, Jason Varitek, and Trot Nixon. And we have footage, the only footage in town of being on a duck boat in the Charles River and having just lines of people looking in at the boats as they're just going about their business, celebrating that parade, which was the most awesome parade I've ever been a part of. And then in 2005, it was all about celebrating that World Series championship everywhere you went. So that for me, as a kid who grew up with a baseball love and a Red Sox, that was everything. And then to top it off with some of the greatest Super Bowls you'll ever see, you know, the Malcolm Butler interception, which was crazy, and then the 28-3 comeback over the Falcons, which was insane. And then Brady's basically last one with the Rams, and that AFC Championship game in Kansas City, where the game plan should probably be in Canton, where the first Super Bowl game plan against the Rams was. That one should be in Canton too, because of just the textbook way they beat Mahomes, kept him off the field, and Brady and Gronk on their last legs kind of driving through it, and Edelman and everything else. And then the excitement in that locker room with like little kids coming into Kansas City and beating the Chiefs when everyone thought they wouldn't. So we've experienced every single high you can imagine here in the city of Boston, and it's been a blast.
But Dan, you're a young guy. You're a kid.
Yeah.
You're thinking about your career. You're still a kid. You're thinking about your career. And if you look at it right now, you have been part of some of the most amazing situations in Boston, New England for your whole life. Could you ever have pictured that when you were just a little guy trying to get into sports?
No, you know, and it's funny because I grew up and I would do like dorky things like we all do as broadcasters and everything else. You know, I would be in my backyard and I would paint a strike zone, and I would just get into the windup like Louis Tiant and just throw a pitch and say the 2-1 count. I would do that. And then I would also go into my yard and I'd be shooting baskets, you know, like every kid doing play-by-play. And I loved hockey. I'd be slapping pucks in my basement, listening to Bruins games and out playing street hockey. And, you know, it's war over to Esposito, to Hodge, to Cashman, to Busick, and everything else. I loved sports as a kid, like a lot of kids do. Mm-hmm. It has been just a thrill a minute for me. And I think what defines me, if you really want to know what I'm all about, it's been living that dream of just being in Boston, around Boston sports. That's all I've ever wanted to do. And, you know, at Syracuse, we used to broadcast games all over the country. And, you know, we'd go on road trips together. 4 of us went down to Georgetown to do the Georgetown-Syracuse game my senior year. And we introduced ourselves to the Larry King producer. And he was doing the old mutual radio show from 11, Eastern time to 1 or 2 Eastern time every night. And we just sat outside the studio, 4 of us Syracuse students, like little kids, like looking in the zoo, you know, and he's out there doing his thing. And he came out during a break and he said, where are you guys from? We're from Syracuse, blah, blah, blah. He goes, why don't you hang around a little bit? We'll do a little shtick together on the air. You know, Larry King is like, you know, it's like, oh my gosh, it's Larry King. But one of the cool things I have a tape of is it was myself, and I'm going to name drop Mike Tirico, you know, was one of the guys that was with us. And then a guy, Bill Roth, from Virginia, did Virginia Tech for years and everything else. And another friend of mine, Charlie, we just went in the studio and he interviewed us for 5 minutes and it was fun. But when he was done, he was like, all right, you guys are all Syracuse. You all want to be broadcasters. Let's go around the room. And I'm going to say, Mike Tirico, you want to be a network star, blah, 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 blah. And he was spot on it. And he got to me and he goes, Dan Roche said, you're going to be a Boston guy through and through. I can hear it in your accent. I can hear everything about you. You just want to be working in Boston and having fun. And I was like, you know what? Larry King was spot on when it comes to trying to predict what I want it to be. So, yeah, I just been doing it a long time and I still love doing it. So I'll try to do it as long as I can. It's certainly been a blast.
I worked 2 years with Larry King. I produced an interview show he did on the Dodger Network. And he was great because you never had to script anything. You just kind of let him go.
Yep, and he'd walk in and say, Mark, hello.
Yeah. And his father-in-law would come in for all the tapings, and his father-in-law was his age, so it was kind of interesting.
Yeah. We were such dorks. We would love like him, and, you know, we would watch CNN Sports, you know, and Fred Hickman and all those guys, and it was just like, you know, it'd be New Year's Eve. We'd be sitting there watching, you know, CNN Sports Hour from 11 to midnight, you know, like dorks and everything else. But
raise your hand if you can relate. Hey, Danny, I worked with you for almost 12 years, 2011 on. You're one of the most positive people I know. When it comes to the Patriots and that run, is part of you sad that part of your career is over, or are you able to just look back and enjoy that you were a part of it?
Well, people say to me, like, how long do you want to do it? Right? How long do you want to keep going? And I just keep saying, something will tell me. I get excited when I drive down Route 1 in Foxborough, Massachusetts, Sunday morning at 8 a.m. before a 1 o'clock game, because I get to watch a game, right? And I get to watch football, and I get to watch a story, and I get to watch, I'm able to talk about it pregame, talk about it postgame, and break it all down. And I love the games. So I never sit there and say, gosh, remember the old days, because how spoiled were we? Where there were times when we were rooting for a loss, and you know this, Scotty, so that we wouldn't have to stay up all night and then fly home and have a parade the next day or 2 days later. We'd be like, another parade. You might as well lose. You know what I mean? It's like, that's how spoiled we were. But no, I still, like, even though the team was 4-13 the last 2 years, still love going to the game, still love breaking it down, still love doing the interviews and everything else. And I look back on it and I say, it was awesome, as I said, with you guys, with all the memories that we have, but I still love it. I look forward to just regular season games and things like that. So I like telling stories. I like doing my job and just having a good time. So I tend to stay positive, as you know, and just still have fun doing it. Because what else am I going to do? I have enough dark suits, white shirts and ties to be a funeral director. That's the only thing I can be right now, because I don't know anything else. Sorry for your loss. If there's anything I can do, please let me know. That's the only thing I can do besides broadcast.
Sorry for your loss. That's nice of you to say, because I'm a Raiders fan.
Yes. Sorry about everything when it comes to the Raiders. So, but Tom Brady's is a part owner, so he's going to find a coach and a quarterback, and everything's going to be great.
Yes.
So we do a trivia segment on the show called 50-50.
I'm terrible at trivia, so I'm already out.
Well, it's 50-50. You got it's true or false, okay? And we'll go back to Curt Gowdy, okay?
This guy works at WBZ.
Yeah, true or false? Curt Gowdy was a basketball and tennis star in college.
Yes, so University of Wyoming. Correct.
See, you did know.
Yes. Yeah. Yep.
And I think in high school he had like the state scoring record or something like that.
Yeah, and I think he hurt his back, and he had a spinal surgery or what have you that prevented him from playing sports ever again. But he's fished. One of the cool things that I used to do. So when I was there, like I said, Curt Gowdy wasn't around as often as you'd want, but he was in and out of the office. So whenever a Red Sox story happened, if someone passed away, from the earlier days of Red Sox lore, I would always call his house in Brookline, and I would speak to his secretary and his personal assistant, and I would say, "Hi, it's Dan Roche calling from Curt's stations in Lawrence. I would like to talk to Mr. Gowdy. If you could have him call me whenever he could." And she would always leave the message. So he would call me, and I would say, "All right, Curt." He had that tone. He said, "Hey, Danny," you know what I mean? He just had that twang. And I'd say, "All right, Curt, where are you?" This is my favorite part of the conversation. "Where are you?" "Well, I'm in the Netherlands. I just got out of a creek. I was fishing, fly fishing, and everything." Like, oh man, that's awesome. You know what I mean? So, so that's why I know everything about Gowdy, because I just I loved everything about his career. So it was very, very cool.
He's the only sportscaster I can think of that has a park named after him.
I know.
Isn't that neat?
Yeah. Like, again, he was just everything he did was awesome. And he was one of those times where there weren't a lot of broadcasters. So he was able to do World Series, Super Bowls, whatever he wanted to do, basically he could do, which made it even more special. Yeah. The Olympics, everything. And he was just such a pro at everything. It's like Sean. He reminds me of Sean McDonough. Anything you give Sean, he can be great at. No matter what you give him, he'll make it sound good. So that to me is a gift. That's what makes them unique and elite and Hall of Fame type of people.
Hey, Danny, you have a show to go and anchor, so we're going to let you hang up, but can't thank you enough for sharing some insight into the great Curt Gowdy and that New England football team as well. Thanks, buddy. My best to Pam and Harry and Tori and all the Rochies. Miss you, buddy.
Yeah, miss you too, Scotty and Mark and Bill.
Thank you, Dan.
Very nice to be on with you guys anytime. It's been a pleasure.
You just live the dream, man.
Dan Roche, everyone. He is as good as they come. All right, college hoops. Who wants to update us on what's going on there? Mark, you got something for us?
I do. I have a really exciting thing happening in the Indiana-Iowa game that was played in Bloomington. So Iowa misses a shot in the final seconds, and like over 17,000 fans at that game in Indiana just go nuts. And so you would think, well, what happened? Did they miss the shot and Indiana held on for like a 2-point win or some narrow victory? No, you know what the final score of that game was? 102-49. What was significant about that 53-point win is that since they held their opponent to under 50 points, fans could go to a local restaurant and get a free burger and fries if you had a ticket stub from the game. Anytime
Nice.
someone scored less than 50 points, 50 or fewer against Indiana, you got the free food.
Wow.
Love it. Let's move on to a little bit of hockey. These Seals refuse to play dead. Now, we all know that Charlie Finley owned the A's and was known to be an innovator and a cheap SOB. He also owned the California Seals, a hockey team in the NHL in Oakland, but for many reasons, he sold the team to the NHL for just under $7 million, and now the league is looking for a new buyer. The team has won, get this, 3 of their last 59 road games.
That's a fine team right there.
But things are looking up. They've gone 2-3-1 in their last 6 away from home, including a win over the Blues in St. Louis. Mark, what happened?
Well, they stunned the Blues 3-2. I can remember that day. I was storming around the house saying, darn it, man, how can we lose to the Seals? This is not going to get my seal of approval.
You know, the sad part is
Yeah.
part of me believes that you're telling the truth.
Well, okay, you can believe that on Tiger games and maybe Cowboys games, not Blues games. No.
Can the team survive in Oakland? In their 7.5 seasons, the Seals have had 5 owners, 7 coaches, and 3 names: the California Seals, the Oakland Seals, the California Golden Seals. The answer is no. They left not too.
Go to Cleveland.
Is that where they went?
Yeah, they became the Cleveland Barons, right?
Wasn't it?
Well, you know what's interesting? Before they became the Barons, I think they were owned by the 15 other teams for a while.
Right. Yeah, I think you're right.
All right, let's get going to the final part of this magazine. For the record, Bill, you got anyone?
Yeah, I'm going to make it. Phil Esposito scored his 508th goal. It was 5th all time. He finished with 717, which is still 7th all time. And then I'm going to make this quick. But we all know Ovechkin is about to break Gretzky's goal record of 894. He's just about 20 behind. But looking over the records, if you look at Gretzky has 1,900 assists, more than Ovechkin has 708. But then you look at shorthanded goals, Ovechkin's got 5. That's pretty good, don't you think? Gretzky has 73.
I was just going to say, I bet you had 70.
It's great he'll break the goal record, but when you start looking at Gretzky ones, I start thinking, wow. Just not even close.
No. Mark?
I got one. It's in track and field. And in the first major meet of the indoor season, Marty LaCurry, who I don't know if anyone remembers Marty, ran the mile in 3:57.7 to beat Steve Prefontaine in the National Invitation at College Park. And to me, it just brought up Steve Prefontaine, who was just this unbelievable runner who had his life cut short, and he died in a car accident in 1975.
Did he really?
Yes, he was only 34 years old. He was one of the great athletes, and they made a couple movies based on his life. I think there were 2 movies that were actually made about him.
Wasn't one called Prefontaine?
I think one was called Prefontaine. I'm trying to remember. I want to say, was it Billy Crudup? Someone played him. I can't remember who played him. Yeah. So, but there were 2 of these movies on his death. He was the most popular athlete in Oregon at the time.
And isn't he one of the first to wear Nike?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah, him and Anthony Davis.
And you go into Oregon, right?
He did.
He did. When you think of Oregon track and field, I always think of Steve Prefontaine and that long blonde hair just flying in the wind.
Yeah, and when you think of Oregon track and field, that's the only name I think of. So,
yeah.
But they were a juggernaut, no question about that. I got you guys got to know that I'm going to go with Ken Stabler,
Yes.
being named most valuable player in the NFL. Led the Raiders to a 12-2 record in the AFC Western Division Championship. 25 touchdown passes, completed 57% of his passes for 2,469 yards. That's about a half a season for quarterbacks now.
Yep. That's my next book I'm reading, Ken Stabler, since we talked to Villapiano.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, my next one's the Stabler book. Yep.
Can't wait. Can't wait to hear about that. Yeah, that'll be fun. A lot of divorces, Phil said that book caused.
Yes. Yes. That's why I thought, oh, that'd be interesting to read.
Faces in the crowd, either of you?
None.
Not for me either.
All right. Well, let's move on. 19th hole, the readers take over. I got one. In case someone has neglected to put the question to the folks at the NCAA, why does one of the New Year's bowl games have to be the championship game or even a semifinal game? It would seem reasonable to simply put these bowl games on as they are now. Play the rose, the sugar, the orange et al., then let the NCAA, perhaps in conjunction with the wire services, digest the results and select 2 teams to square off in the ultimate bowl game a week or 2 later. That should keep the bowl people happy, since every bowl game would be a potential playoff game, and such a procedure should eventually minimize the horrible mismatches. The big game for the national championship could be played the day before the Super Bowl, and it might appropriately be called the Supremacy Bowl. This is from a guy named Jerry Miller. I mean, Jerry's got his finger on the pulse, baby.
He does. He does.
Does Jerry have any stock tips I could use?
Right.
Man.
This episode's being released the day of the national championship game. The first time we've had a 12-team playoff. The top 4 seeds all out. So the teams that the wire services deemed to be the ones to play for it all lost. It's been 50 years since this letter came in. They still haven't figured out the exact way to do it, but Jerry's way seemed like a good idea at the time. It is kind of sad that the Rose Bowl, and this was the argument going in, they don't quite have the same aura that they used to have when we were growing up.
No. I mean, I remember as a kid, New Year's Day was one of my favorite days. And I always remember the Orange Bowl was the last game to be played that. And by that time, I'd watched like 3 or 4 games and I was like burned out. But I do remember I made a bet. There was, I think it was Notre Dame played Nebraska in the Orange Bowl one year. And I made a bet with, I was at some party with my parents and another kid was there. He was a little older than me. And I don't know what the connection was, but anyway, we made a bet on the game and I won it, but I never got paid all these years later. I think he eventually became like, he worked in the journalism business. I think he was like editor in Dayton or something like that. So he worked in the media, but I never got paid. Just like Chris Stegner, who was director at Channel 2 and Channel 9 that Bill and I know. We made a bet in 1981, I want to say. It was some Dodger bet, or I forgot. Maybe it was a football bet. But Chris was to his word. I didn't see Chris again for like, I don't know, 25, 30 years. And after the point, I reminded him and he paid me right off. So
Did the other guy pay you that used to work at NBC, Mark?
Fred?
No, they with the initials FR? No, I've never got that. $234 for the league? No. But I sent the check in the mail. Yeah, well,
It's right. It's still, it'll get there to you.
These are the small things that Mark.
Yes, I was just thinking the exact same thing.
the checks
These are the small-
in the
Guys-
mail.
30 years.
Guys
30
that-
years, Mark waited.
Guys that
to get
stiffed him out of a Orange Bowl bet from 1972. He's
Yep.
coming after you, Ricky.
Yep. Yeah,
Yeah.
you're done, buddy.
Well, hey, want to thank Dan Roche for joining us, talking about Curt Gowdy and what an impact he had on him. We're going to go from Terry Bradshaw on the cover this week to Cheryl Teagues next week, talk about Beauty and the Beast. So looking forward to talking about the swimsuit issue with our dear friend Curry Kirkpatrick next week. Mark, Bill, any final thoughts?
I do have one.
Go for it.
Did you guys know that Joby Hall, the head coach at Kentucky, used to play for the Harlem Globetrotters?
I did not know that. Really?
Yeah. That was interesting. Yeah, because we were talking. He looks like the econ professor.
Yeah.
Love that.
He does.
Who knew?
I know.
The
Yeah, he's a
original
pretty-
White Shadow.
I wonder if he played with Wilt.
No, the White Shadow, Ken Howard was huge. He was like 6'4", 6'5". He looked like a basketball player.
He did. No question. Yeah.
So did
All right,
Salami.
guys. There we go. I'm Scott. That's Bill. That's Mark. Say goodbye, guys.
Goodbye.
And just everyone give your family members a hug and stuff like that. You never know when you'll lose stuff, but family and loved ones is the most important thing. So give them a hug every night.
Love that. We're past our fun. See you next week.